Conversations for change. Because the world is ready. In the past few weeks, since I have gone through Simon Sinek's Why process with Elena Tawari, which you can find a conversation about in an earlier podcast here, I have been exploring this idea that keeps coming up within me of a trajectory of experiences tied to the mystical that seem to span an arc of my entire life. And the first time I actually thought seriously about this was after my process with Elena, when I began to put together the pieces of the stories and the puzzles that make up what became clearly the most important focus for me in this lifetime, and began to realize that the majority of them had to do with being in altered states of consciousness, and that those experiences always happened spontaneously. These were never planned events on my part. I never set an intention to have a mystical experience or to go into some altered state or to take any action that would take me to any of those altered states. But when I began to look back and put the pieces together, what I realized was that these incidents or events or experiences had a natural flow to them that spanned my entire lifetime. And I think up until that moment when that occurred to me, I had always seen each experience as its own event, as its own moment in time where something happened. It had never occurred to me to step back and take a look at the larger picture of what was going on here, or put together these different events over my lifetime and begin to see how they fit together and what they were alluding to, what they were suggesting about why I'm here and what my reason for being is, or to put it another way, what captivates me the most deeply and is the most powerful driver of my reason for being. And suddenly here I was realizing these experiences have been happening my entire life since childhood. In fact, they began in childhood. I have very clear memories of experiences that I had in childhood, whether I was in a dream state or awake, where I was connecting the worlds between the physical and the non-physical. And of course, I think when you're a kid, you don't think of it that way. You're just in an experience. You don't say to yourself, oh, I'm dreaming now. You're just having the experience. And then later, when you're awake in a physical moment and the realities of that dream are coming into your consciousness and awareness, and you're having a sort of mixed experience of physicality and dream world, you don't analyze, you just experience. So with that background coming forward for me, I have been moving through some very interesting times. And one of the things that happened in the midst of all of this happening was that I rediscovered the work of Martin Brofman. And I say rediscovered because I figured out after a little bit that a dear friend, had introduced me to that work several years ago, but I had never taken the time to follow up and look at it. I had forgotten about it, and I never even had pursued it beyond seeing one piece of information about it. And then here came this experience one morning where I came into my computer to do something on the internet and opened my email, and here was a draft email in my computer. It was the email that was front and center when I opened up my email account, and it had a link in it to Martin Brofman's foundation website. I have no idea how it got there. I have no memory of writing a draft. And in the moment of my doing all the things I was doing, I looked at it. I didn't do anything about it, like follow the link or figure it out. I simply said to myself, oh, I don't know what this is, but it looks like it was important to me at some point, so I put it here. I'll just address the email to myself and hit send, and then I'll go back and look at it later. So that's what I did. And of course, that in itself meant I would never know when that draft was written or any more details about it, because all the history changed in the moment that I did that. So that was the first part of the mystery. Later, I went back and opened the email and followed the site and began to read the story of Martin Brofman, which I did not know, and all of his work and the body mirror system of healing that he developed. And as soon as I went deep, because I'm very interested in healing, and I'm very interested in everything that he was talking about. So that led me down a whole series of events, which ultimately led to my getting his book and beginning to listen to it on Audible, and beginning to ask myself, I wonder if there's a way to take his classes, and I wonder if there's anyone who's teaching his method. And all of that led me to finding a woman online named Jo Hickey, who has a podcast called the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. Now, when I first opened the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast webpage, I was in a completely different state of mind, and simply looking at it and going, fairies, fairies, what do you know? I didn't make any connection to my own fairy experiences. In fact, I was looking at it from the perspective of someone who might be saying, oh, geez, fairies? What are we talking about fairies for? Literally, that's where my mindset was. But I looked. And what first happened was I discovered that Jo had an interview with Martin Brofman, who is Martin's wife, who is still among the living. Martin passed many years ago. And so I was excited. I wanted to watch this interview. And that really was what led me to Jo's site, was that I was looking for Martin Brofman information, and she was connected to Martin Brofman. The fairies was just something that was there, and maybe that's why I thought of it the way I did at the time, because I was so focused on the idea of this healing method that the idea of fairies just was not on my radar in the moment. But in any event, I watched the interview. It was wonderful. And then I sent a note to Jo and asked her about her connection to Martin Brofman and his work, and if she knew anything more about how to go to a workshop or how you could find healers who were practicing his methods. Amazingly, Joe wrote me back within 24 hours. And not only did she give me the information to find out more about upcoming classes, but she also let me know that she had been working with Martin herself for the last years of his life. She had been healed by him, and she was a healer who practiced his methods and did remote healing. So now I was on fire, and I immediately wrote her back with a long list of things that I was thinking about. And she also mentioned to me that she had a podcast on her site about her own healing, and there was another one about her own first fairy encounter. So now fairies and Martin Brofman and all of this are beginning to come into a larger picture for me. And again, I'm seeing this arc of the mystical, the outside of normal, and all of the places where it fits together. So I go back to Joe's site and I watch her story of her healing with Martin Brofman. And of course, the healing that she received was a healing of her vision, which has been my lifelong ambition to heal my vision. And at this point, I'm laughing. And I say, okay, I get it. I'm a little slow sometimes, but eventually I get there. So after I listened to this amazing story of how she went through the process of being healed and having her eyesight restored and becoming a healer, I go tootling around and looking at other things she has on her site, and I find her first encounter with fairy. Now, mind you, I haven't thought much about it in advance. I really haven't. I haven't thought about the fact that in the healing work that I do, I have a team of blue fairies who seem to be infinite, who are always coming to work with me. This hasn't even entered my mind. I'm just exploring Joe's site and looking at what she has to offer, and I've decided to see what her first fairy encounter looked like. So I go and I watch her podcast, and here she is telling the story of a little green man who appears in the woods many years ago. In fact, in the 1990s. And as she's telling the story and I'm listening, I suddenly realize that I have had a very similar encounter, not in the woods, but in my kitchen in the years when I was living outside Seattle, Washington. And everything in me just comes to a full stop. Another story rising up out of my consciousness from my past, saying to me, "Do you remember? Do you remember? This is just another little facet of the arc of the mystical that has moved through your life from the very beginning." And now I'm transported. I'm rethinking, remembering, going back in my mind over all the details and wondering where did I write this down? Because I know I wrote it down, because I write down everything. And it takes a while for me to find it, but I find it. And as I go back through it, I realize and remember all the subtle details of that experience. And it reminds me in the moment of my memory of several others that happened during the same time frame. But mostly I'm transfixed and transported by the memory of the green man. And that's what I called him, because I couldn't think of any other way to describe what he was. He literally was a man who was not a man but a plant. And he was standing in my kitchen doorway when I turned around. He filled the doorway, and he didn't look anything like a human being, except that he had the most penetrating eyes, and he was looking right at me. But the rest of his features looked more or less like philodendron and vining plants and the bark of trees and leaf patterns. And they were all distinctly clear and perfectly visible. There was no detail that I didn't get as I stood and looked at him. And his look was a look of interest and kindness and compassion, maybe even love and curiosity. And I'm sure mine must have been the same. And for the longest moment, we stood and just looked at each other. We couldn't have been 3 feet apart. I was in the hallway, he was in the kitchen doorway. The light was coming from the windows behind him in the kitchen and the lights in the ceiling. And I watched him, and he watched me. And then in a moment, and to this day I don't know what it was, something distracted me. A sound, a movement somewhere in the house, I don't know. But I glanced away, and in the moment that I glanced away, he vanished. When I looked back, he was gone. The other thing that happened when I looked back was that I realized in that moment that I was standing in the hallway and I had not yet put in my contact lenses, which meant I could not see anything around me other than as vague shapes. I often think of it as sponge painting. It's the opposite of things being blurry. So pixelated that you can't make out any defined lines. And that really surprised me, because now I had 2 things I had to consider. One was there had been a very large man-like creature standing in the doorway of my kitchen, and the other was that I had seen him in perfect detail without having the contact lenses I normally need in my eyes in order to see. It's been 30 years since that happened. And yet it is as clear to me in my memory as if it was yesterday. And I think that might be one of the most defining features of these experiences. They are outside of time. Maybe they're even outside of time-space. But they seem to be happening in the physical realm. But what's happening is not explainable by any of the rules of the physical world. And I wasn't even aware of that memory and that story until the moment that I listened to Jo talking about her experience. It had completely left my reality. I had forgotten. And ever since the conversation with Elena, which brought all of this to my attention, this continues to happen. I have experience after experience bringing me back to memories that have simply been a part of my landscape without me sort of connecting the dots between them all, until I get to where I am now, where I suddenly realize, looking back, that my entire life is simply a string of these non-ordinary experiences strung together through the weave and the weft of all of the years of my being here. And I had never pulled that thread in the way that I am now. And as I do, it's taking me into places I had never expected to go. As this pattern emerges and I begin to see how it all fits, what it shows me and what it fills me with is the sense that there is far more to be trusted, to be enamored of, to be in love with in this world, in this universe. We are so held and so protected. And as we begin to see and feel that more and more clearly, our opportunity to evolve and transform expands exponentially. And I think that must be the magic and the reason for all of these pieces falling into place for me the way they are now. That I suddenly am in a place where I can finally appreciate and relax into a knowingness that all really is well, that the universe has my back, and that all of these magical experiences, like pearls strung across my experience, are here to remind me over and over again that this is the truth of what life is made of. This is the real reality. How sweet is that?